Hello, in this video I'm going to get you guys started on exercise 1 in chapter 4. We don't have a lot of time in the classroom, so it's just going to be a little bit of a push into the project. Let's start by opening up Visual Studio if you haven't done that already, and then go ahead and we're going to open up your web calculator. However, this is my standard thing here. Before I do that, what should I do? Make a version of it, right? Version it before you do anything. So I want to go into my folders where I've got this stuff stored. I'm trying to remember what class this is. Oh yeah, Web 2. It's been a long day, folks. And this is spring 2018. And which one of these is my calculator? Am I working in the right spot? All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back here. Web calculator. Oh, I went into the wrong spot last time. You see that? See where it ended up? So I don't want to work with it in that spot. So I'm actually going to go to Users, TK, Source, Repos. All right, so here I am navigating to places I don't want to go because I don't follow my own practices, which I recommend my students do. Isn't that funny? Because if I saw you guys doing this, I'd get on your case about it. So here I am doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this. I'm not going to cut it. I'm actually going to leave it there just in case I have an issue. And then I'm going to navigate back to where I was inside my Google Drive. That's my preferred working location. And just a handy tip for me, whenever I'm working on a web project actively, I always like to work with my local files in a cloud situation, whether it's Creative Cloud, OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive. So actually my local files are also cloud files. So it's kind of like unique because you're working your files out in the cloud and then you push them out to the server out in the cloud. Your machine just kind of sits in the middle. All right, so I'm going to paste that folder in here. All right, now I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. Actually, first we're going to make a version. All right, got to do that part too. Paste that back in. Realize that project was so big. All right, and then I'm going to rename the copy and just call it Chapter 3. Complete. So now I have a safety point I can go back to, not have to worry if I screw something up. It's a safety net. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and open up the project, and I'm going to open it up by actually, I'm debating here. Should I open it up as a website or a solution? What does the book say? Open project. You know what I'm going to do what the book says just to be on the safe side. Not you. You know, it's only Tuesday. It's not even Friday yet. And that's not where we're going, right? All right, there's my solution file. I'm going to go ahead and open the project. All right, as we're walking through the steps here, I'm pulling the book off to the second screen. And you guys can follow along with your own copy. Does anybody need me to broadcast my screen, or are we good? We're good? All right, so we've opened the project, so now we are on step number 3. And in step number 3, they want us to right-click the default HTML file and choose Set as Start Page. Because if you remember in the previous chapter, we set the calculator test to be the start page because that was our focus, was doing the tests. So now we're setting it back to default. Then what they want you to do is they want you to start the internal web server by clicking the play button, and they want to make sure that that's the page it's loading up and not the tests. So the goal now is to view the actual web page. We ran our tests. Now we're going to actually build the application. So that looks fine, right? We all good? All right. Is it going to work if I click on anything? It does. Wow. So what are we doing in this chapter? Oh, what's the topic? CSS. That's right. We're styling this now. So we actually make it look nice. All right. So we're going to go over to the content folder. And I think this is kind of strange. Where would you normally put a style sheet? Right next to the index. I would put it in a styles folder myself. But I'm following what the book says, so please be mindful of that. So they want us to do an add. And notice style sheet is listed here. You can also bring up the add new item. That's up to you. But I'm going to go ahead and choose style sheet. And they want us to name it default.css, all lowercase. Go ahead, press enter. And then you can see it's got a basic style sheet here. They assume you're going to apply styles to the body, right? They also want us to open up the default HTML page, and then they want us to basically create a link from the style sheet on over to the HTML page. So what we're going to do preemptively is just drag and drop, and I'm going to put it actually above the JavaScript. Excuse me. All right. And once again, the drag and drop is just a good way to not make typos. If you want to type it out, that's fine. Just make sure that you're accurate with it. All right. Moving on to step number 7. In the body tag of the CSS, we want to add a style. And that is background dash color. And notice they're having us use HSL. Like, wow. That's kind of interesting. So let's type this in. This is not a format that I'm comfortable using, simply because my brain has spent so much time learning hex and RGB that I never really wrapped my head around it. And frankly, I think most web designers feel the same way. The reason that you might use this is if somebody gave you a color code specifically in this format. That would tend to be from like broadcast media. We talked about that earlier. But we're going with it. Remember, this stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. So hue is the color, saturation is how strong the color is, and then the other one is how bright it is. Believe it or not, you get all the same colors out of these 3 values that you can out of RGB or hex. Same thing. They want us to add another style, and this one is for input. So this is going to style the text boxes that are on the page. I'm just going to copy and paste this in. So we're going to give them a size and a shape. We're going to align the text to the right, because if you guys notice, like the numbers on the calculator right now are on the left, because that's default. If you guys ever use a calculator, the numbers are always on the right side. Right? So that's what we're doing there. Adding a little bit of padding to make some space, and the border is inset, so that way the border will still be there, but it will have a little bit of a look to it. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to style the button. Once again, they're going to stick with HSL colors on this. This is step number 9, by the way, at the top of page 196. So we're giving a color to the button. We're giving it a width and a height. You can do that with buttons. And then on this one, they're doing a border outset. And what they're trying to do here is create an effect. An inset makes it look like it's going inwards, and an outset makes it look like it's popping out. Step number 10. Now we're going to add a hover effect to the button. And this is kind of interesting because we were talking about it in the lecture, right, where I told you that with the hover pseudo selector can really be applied to things that are not links, right? So you can apply it to lots of different things, and here's an example of that. So what they're telling you is if you hover over the button, the background color is going to change. On to step number 11. Step number 11, we are going to have a different look for the button if it's active. When is the button active? When you press on it. Only for the moment you're pressing on it. Isn't that kind of interesting? I always thought that active one was kind of weird, honestly. Because like if I make like the button red as I'm pressing it, it will only be red as my mouse button is depressed. As soon as I let go, that changes. So it's like very instantaneous. It's kind of a weird pseudo-selector. But once again, notice that it's switching the border to inset. Now remember in the previous style setting it was outset, so it makes it look like it's popping out. When it's inset, it looks like it's going to sink in, so the button's going to look like it depresses as we click it. That's kind of cool. The border will get thicker. We're also changing the border color and the background color at the same time every time the button is being clicked. It will make it look somewhat animated. Step number 12, we're going to do a combination selector on this one, so we're going to apply both to the input, not to step number 13, but to the input and the button, a font size, some colors, and a margin. So we're going to make a little space around the objects. Moving on to step number 13, and I should probably say this if you haven't already, Control S to save. And better yet, do a save all, make sure your HTML document is saved too. Don't lose your work. I had this happen to my daughter yesterday. She was working at home, making all these like drawings in an art program, and then Windows 10 decided to do an update automatically. In a couple hours of her drawing work, she had never hit save. But then she was like, that's okay, I didn't like it too much. So she like tried to justify it, but first thing you should do is save often. The book doesn't tell you to save, but I kind of do this like automatic in my head. Like I just put in a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, Control S to save. So whenever you're going to say that. All right, step number 13. Now we're going to apply a style to something with an ID, and that's going to be the result text box. So that's going to have its own background color to it. And now we're on step number 14. And at this point they want us to press F5 or hit the play button basically and take a look at what we have. And what they're telling us is that we should have a nicer looking calculator. What did I do wrong, folks? Well, something went wrong. Clearly. You know, frankly, I'm not really sure. Here I am thinking, well,
I had that same problem. And like all the code was there when I was having the problem. The base app. Yeah.
What did I just do? I refreshed it. So what was happening? It was cached. So if that happens to you, don't freak out. Don't email me. Basically, watch this video and just refresh, because that's what happens is it'll keep a state inside the cache so it loads faster. But as designers, remember, F5, Control R, little refresh button. If those don't work, try Control F5. If that doesn't work, shut down the browser, restart it. I mean, you know you made the changes, you know something should have happened, right? So here we are with a nicer looking calculator. Notice the buttons now are all aligned because they're all given a size. They're all given the same size. The font is different. The displays up top have a look. If we click on any button, if we hover over it, see the color change. If I click it, you see it kind of pseudo look like it was pressed. So something that looks a little better. All right, so now we are on step number 15, where they want us to actually enter some numbers in, and I know you guys have probably done this already. And just to make sure that it works. They also want you in step number 16 to switch back so that you can see that this is actually running. You see the diagnostic tool running in the background. You see the pause and the stop button here. Just remember, when it's running actively in the browser and you see pause and stop here, there's some code that you will not be able to change. Or if you are able to change it, it will not take effect and you won't be able to save it. So either hit stop here or close the browser in order to free the resources up to be able to work on it some more. Well, that got us through the first exercise. Well, even though class is formally ended, I have a few people that are hanging out here working on stuff, and since I have a meeting right after, I'm going to actually continue forward and finish off the rest of this exercise. All right, so we are on exercise 2 now in chapter 4, and it wants us to open the project again, open up the HTML, which we already have open. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to add a div tag now to the HTML. So we're going to add div ID calculator. I'm going to actually just copy that in. And I know it's not a complete copy. I noticed that I didn't get that closing bracket, but that's actually okay. So I'm going to drop that in up here. And they want us to basically encapsulate the whole calculator with a div tag. So I'm just going to drop that in, close the bracket. Then I'm going to take the closing div tag, cut it, and then move it to the bottom. Notice it automatically formatted everything for me, which is, I think, helpful. All right. Now, the reason for encapsulating anything in HTML, this is a really helpful trick to know, is so that I can then apply styles to that whole object collectively. And if you see what the output is a couple pages down, part of it is that we're putting the whole thing in a box. So it kind of looks more like a calculator. And that's only possible via encapsulation. And that's really actually a very helpful tip, you guys. If you want to control objects on the screen, one way to do it is to put them inside of another object. Especially if you're having a hard time putting it exactly where you want or getting it to behave the way you want. One of the tricks is, and a div is a great way to do it, just put a div around it, give it an ID, and that might help take care of the issue. All right. Now they want us to go over to the CSS file, and then we're going to add a series of styles here that's going to basically apply to that ID, which is the whole calculator. I'm being really careful here in copying and pasting that CSS in portions so that I don't get like the page numbers and titles. I'm just going to drop it right at the bottom of the CSS, and then I'm also going to grab this last little tidbit here and back over and paste that in. So now we're taking that whole thing, we're going to put a border around it. It's going to have a different background color, a very specific height and width, and then the left and right auto will allow us to center it on the screen. Then we're also aligning all the text to center that needs to be, and putting a little padding in it to give it a little bit of breathing space. Nothing too difficult. One thing that we're also going to do is we're going to change a couple of these styles. So notice that input has got some different things. And I'm going to be really cautious with this one because I know that input and button already have styles, right? So I'm going to paste this in actually right next to it so I can see, are there any of these styles here that are conflicting with these? No, not at all. And that is okay to do. So you can have something that has shared styles together, and then whatever is unique, you can list it separately and give it its own, and it's cool. So do the same thing with the button styles. All right, so now I have this button code, and I'm going to jump back over to Visual Studio. And one of the questions I'm getting here in the classroom was, what about the other input code? But if you scroll up here, wait, I do have that code. You're right. All right. So really what they want me to do is replace those. But here's a CSS question for you. Would this still work?
Yeah, sure.
It will, because they come after. But really, you're right. I should go up above and get rid of those, because really I'm replacing them. So they're really, what they're doing is tweaking those. All right. All right. Now, this is a kind of an interesting little style. We're actually going to take, and this is one that's a little bit unusual, we're looking for any tag here with this one that's got an attribute of read-only. Now, we know that read-only is on this txt result. So if I went to my HTML file, you'll see the result field, which is right up here, is set for read-only. So what this line of CSS does is it looks for the attribute of read-only. Notice there's no tag in front of it, so anything that's set to read-only will take this style. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. That will negate this one. Now my habit, as I was saying in the lecture before, is I usually don't get rid of any styles. I usually comment them out when I do development work. I mean, in this case, it's probably safe to get rid of it, but it might not be a bad habit. You know, because that way, if you were doing like your own work, that you could go back if this didn't work, and you wouldn't have to retype it. So I'm just going to comment it out and move on. And then what nice thing that the book does here is it says the completed code should look like the following. So then you can put it side by side and double check. And you might want to do that. I'm just taking it on faith that mine is fine, and I'm at the point where I'm ready to run it, so I'm going to do that. So let's go ahead and hit the run button and see the result. And if I think it's going to look the way I hope it does, it'll look a little bit like this. So now we have maybe not the best color choices on the planet, especially when you have like purple on top of purple or blue or whatever you want to call that. But we do have, by the fact that we put the whole calculator inside of a div with an ID, it's encapsulated now, so now we can style it together. There's a little bit of padding in there. The buttons are centered. We have a little bit of a different look for a couple of things, and we tried a couple of different techniques. Really not a very difficult exercise at all, so I'm hoping you guys don't struggle with it too much. And I'm not sure that there's any more to this. I think that's all of it. And then they want us to try the buttons and make sure that it works. So that actually is the completion of Chapter 4. Not really that hard. I know that in some subsequent chapters you might run into some issues with CSS. I thought it was in this chapter, but I'll show you the fix. If you guys do get stuck on any of this, don't hesitate to contact me and I'll help you out. You can also look at the archive videos, but I'm not sure in the archive videos that actually do the exercises, right? I don't think I do. All right, so that's why I'm recording these, and hopefully you find them helpful, and we'll see you guys next week.